Sticking with football, something popped up today, and before we even talk about it, I'm going to play a clip. This is Tony Gibson, Marshall's coach, former West Virginia defensive coordinator, today during an interview.
Now, the only thing I have is I want to play them. I think that'd be great for our state, for our two universities, and keep the money in state. So I'm trying to make a big push at making that happen, but I'm only one voice, but I'm never going to stop.
So you mentioned that. I mean, obviously, trying to get that back would be the first time in well over a decade that's happened. What's the sales pitch with it? I mean, I know you mentioned it's good for the state. That's the obvious. But outside of that, from a scheduling perspective, how would that benefit you all from that standpoint?
Well, it would benefit us from my first game as the head coach at Marshall. We got to go to Athens, Georgia. So that's and not taking anything away from West Virginia, Georgia. I'm not comparing that. But if we're going to play a Power 4 school, let's play our in-state Power 4 where it means something to everybody, and more people get involved. All those things. I get it. I was on the other side of this rivalry at WVU. Nobody wanted to play Marshall for a lot of different reasons, and the biggest reason was you didn't want to be the one that lost to Marshall. So that is, but the thing now is they say, well, you only hold 30-some thousand at your stadium, and well, Ohio University only holds 25,000 at their stadium, and WVU's going there. So it doesn't make sense to me on how that can happen, but we can't play a game and again, keep the money here.
All right, Jonathan. What do you think, man? What are your thoughts?
All right. So first thing I think, I love Tony Gibson. Boone County, West Virginia guy. I love Tony Gibson. But I would just say it's not surprising to me that he's taken this stance as the head football coach of Marshall University. Have you ever noticed that this, I don't want to call it an argument, but this stance is usually one-sided? And you hear it every couple years. I think the biggest thing that I would let me address this first. I don't think many people are real excited about West Virginia going to Ohio either. And so I realize that's an argument, and I realize that's a talking point to kind of work in your favor. But that schedule was kind of done at a time where schools like West Virginia were trying to benefit some of the smaller schools. That kind of came in and then quickly exited. So it's not something that stuck around very long, and most West Virginia people aren't thrilled about that. There's a part of those that I some of that, but most of but one key phrase that I disagree with strongly: means something to everybody. That's not true. I don't think it means something to everybody. In fact, I think there's a lot of people on West Virginia's side specifically that don't give a crap about that game. So I just don't think that argument doesn't hold water to me, that it means something to everybody. I think it means something to everybody on one side, but I don't think it means something. Look, I've said it forever. I just don't think it benefits West Virginia to play the game. I don't think West Virginia is getting anything out of it. It's just my personal opinion. It's not for me.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you, and I've said as much. And maybe the fact that I now have a kid at Marshall is changing the way I view things, okay? I'll admit that. But when I saw that West Virginia was going to Ohio, when I first looked at that a couple years ago, and I looked at that and I went, why? You constantly talked about how you didn't want to play Marshall in Huntington, but you'll go to Ohio. Like it did seem hypocritical a little bit to me.
Yep.
But then I would sit back and think, okay, what are the reasons you travel to a certain way? Recruiting is a piece of it, right? West Virginia doesn't need, no offense to Huntington, West Virginia usually gets the best players from Huntington anyway. They don't get 100% of them, but they get most of them if they want them. Do they not?
Yeah.
So they don't really need to go to Huntington to recruit players from Huntington. And let's just be honest, but you and I are both West Virginia residents. We love our state. There aren't a ton of Power 4 players coming out of West Virginia every year. But guess where there are a ton of Power 4 players? The state of Ohio. So maybe it helps recruiting a little bit. You know, I know Athens, Ohio is not that far across the state line, but it's still Ohio. So that's something to consider. It doesn't help West Virginia at all to play the game, but I do agree with some of the things Tony said. You know, it would be good for the state. And if West Virginia is insistent on playing one G5 team every year, why can it not be Marshall? You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
Outside of the recruiting, and does the recruiting piece even matter as much now that the transfer portal is in play? So that's an argument to that. So I kind of find myself, Jonathan, to be honest, I kind of find myself in the middle on this topic because I kind of see both sides. I hate it when I do that because I feel like sometimes I need to pick a side.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know that I can pick one on this one anymore.
Yeah, and to show that I'm Fox News here, I'm trying to be fair and balanced. Look, I understand what he's saying too, and I agree with Tony Gibson in this. Nobody wants to be the coach at West Virginia that loses to Marshall. Like, I get it. I get it.
That's kind of a yellow way to think about it, isn't it?
It is, but I don't disagree. If, for example, 5 years from now, if West Virginia lost at Ohio, not many people would talk about it. But 5 years from now, if West Virginia went to Marshall and got beat, I think people would still talk about that. So I understand the aspect of you don't want to be the head coach that loses to Marshall. I get it. But it's also not the first time, Couz. And again, I'll preface by saying, look, I love Tony Gibson. I've met Tony Gibson, know Tony Gibson. I've interacted with him multiple times. Love Tony Gibson.
Yeah.
But if you'll remember when he got hired at Marshall, he also referred to West Virginia as the school up north.
Yeah. I ain't gonna lie, that made me mad.
I do tend to believe, because I do know Tony, that I believe that was kind of said in some good fun, number one. And I also think it was said because, look, he's a head football coach at Marshall, and what's he trying to do? He's trying to rile up that fan base, trying to get that booster support. Coaches say things. I get that. My point being here, Couz, is that this isn't the first time he's kind of, I wouldn't call it taking a shot, but he's poked at the bear a little bit. And what he's trying to do is just rejuvenate that side of the fan base, that side of that part of the state. And so let me ask you this question. If Tony Gibson had got the head coaching job at West Virginia, would he feel the same way?
Probably not. And I think that ties right into Chris's comment here. He says the only reason it makes sense to coach Tony Gibson is because he's coaching there now. Didn't feel that way about the game happening when he was hired DC. Yeah.
Yeah. So if Tony Gibson were hired over Rich Rodriguez, would he sign off on that game? I think he'd have a little bit of a different tune.
Yeah. Ranger Buck even goes a step further and says the only thing that compete with the 2007 pit loss would be a loss to Marshall. Wow.